This is a cryptogram, also known as the Aristocrat cipher. To create one, you take the English alphabet and map every letter to another random letter, forming a key. Now take whatever message you want to encrypt, this is called the plain text, and substitute each letter with the letter that it maps to in your key. And voila! You now have the ciphertext. Without the key you've created, it's complete gibberish. But yet... Yeah, no, it turns out cryptograms are pretty useless at encoding your message, but they make for great puzzles, so in this video I'm giving you a detailed guide to solving any cryptogram you come across. One quick thing before we get started. The app I'll be using to showcase cryptograms is called Sci Codebusters. We made it available completely for free on the App Store and added a ton of unique features to help you improve in cryptograms and other ciphers, so definitely check it out. Alright then, let's start at the beginning. You open a fresh puzzle with nothing filled in. What do? There are 4 main techniques you can use to solve a cryptogram. After covering all of them, I'll walk through some examples so you can see how they're applied. Starting with the most straightforward one, look out for word patterns. I consider word patterns to be anything that's a dead giveaway regardless of where you see them. For example, if you ever see a 4-letter word that starts and ends with the same letter, you can immediately tell it probably decodes to that. Like this, there are so many word patterns where the letters are arranged in a certain order, and you should be familiar with the most common words that fit each pattern. A word like this, that's people, and this, that's without. So how do you learn all the word patterns? Well, this app has a giant dictionary of all the word patterns for about 5,000 of the most common words in English. While playing, if you ever see a word pattern you can't figure out, simply click on the dictionary icon to see the most common words which fit that pattern. You can also just search up a word in the dictionary and see all the other words which share the same pattern. Of course, these many word patterns can be quite overwhelming, so here's a smaller list of very common word patterns to memorize before getting started with solving. Word patterns also don't necessarily have to have repeating letters. An obvious version of this is if you see a 1-letter word. That's immediately either an A or an I, but it could also be a 5-letter word with no repeating letters. Now you might be thinking, couldn't that be literally any one of these 100 or so words? Well, midway through the puzzle you will very likely have already filled out some of the letters, and that is when it does become a very useful word pattern. One common situation is when you solve for A and T, let's say through other word patterns since A and T are pretty common letters. Now, somewhere else in the message you see a 5-letter word that starts with A and ends with T. Boom, that pattern decodes to about. To help learn these kinds of word patterns, the dictionary suggests only the words which match the letters you've already filled in. If you see only a few words being recommended or even just one word, then that might be a word pattern worth remembering. Okay, let's move on to the second technique. Pay attention to letter frequencies. While word patterns are incredibly powerful, they do have drawbacks. Going back to that list of word patterns I showed you, the chance of any one of these being correct is only like 70%. The final 3 techniques offer a way to confirm which word pattern is truly the correct one by using the surrounding context of the puzzle. Letter frequencies are probably the easiest to use, so we'll start with that. To sum it up, you look at how frequently a letter appears in a puzzle. Most cryptograms have a number below each letter to tell you how many times it appears in the ciphertext. Now this is the crazy part. If that number is high, it is probably a common letter like E. If that number is not high, it is probably an uncommon letter like J. Here's a chart of how common each letter is in the English language. You'll notice the letter E is quite a bit more common than the others, so if your puzzle has a letter well and beyond more frequent than the rest, it's probably E. There's also a sizable jump after H, so everything below it I would consider an uncommon letter. That being said, letter frequencies can lead you completely astray if used in isolation, because sometimes the message won't match it at all, especially if it's short. That's why I recommend looking for word patterns first, and then confirming them with letter frequencies. The third technique requires a bit more practice as it relies on intuition. Pay attention to letter positions. Basically, you need a good understanding of where letters usually appear in words. Sometimes this is obvious, like if you see 2 of the same letter in a row, it probably isn't an H. Something like an L or an S would make a lot more sense. But there's also a ton more subtle details that you'll pick up with practice. That same double letter shifted over one spot is now either an O or an E. Make the word bigger and it's most likely an L since the word probably ends in LLY. Shift it back to the end of the word and it probably ends in ESS. Usually NESS, but maybe LESS. If y'all are interested, let me know down in the comments and I can make a really detailed video on what positions make sense for every single letter. Now for the final technique before getting into the examples. Pay attention to context. That just means pay attention to how the sentence structures are unfolding. For example, if there's a comma, the word right after it might be a conjunction, like and or but. Also, think about perspective. Is it first person, second person, or third person? Because if a 3-letter word comes after you or they, it might be R. That same 3-letter word coming after I, well, IR doesn't make much sense now, does it? And more broadly speaking, get an idea of what words might be nouns, or verbs, or adjectives, or whatever these are. Basically just use common sense. Like, if the puzzle starts with you must, a natural continuation would be speak, or learn. But don't be like you must ocean, or birds. Like, the context clearly expects a verb. Anyways, let me walk you through how this works, starting with an easy puzzle. I'm going to plug the same quote into the app so we can use the dictionary. Now that we're staring at a blank slate, the first thing you want to do is look for word patterns, specifically the type where nothing is filled in. For beginners, that means this list right here. Right away, I see that this word is a pattern from the list. It decodes to everything. Let's double check it with a dictionary, and yep, everything is the most common word that fits here. Popularity is another option, but way less likely. The next pattern I see is a single letter word, which is almost always either an A or an I, with A being the more frequent guess as the dictionary confirms. I also see this 3-letter word pattern. It could be any of these options, with the top 3 being the most likely. Since we're not totally sure yet, we can use letter frequencies to narrow it down. We've got one medium to low frequency letter and a high frequency double letter at the end. That makes me think it's probably C, though 2 is also a possibility. To narrow it down further, we can look at letter positions. The high frequency letter is showing up at the end of other words, right here and here, which is a lot more characteristic of E than O. So yeah, I feel pretty confident that the word is C. Finally, there's one last word pattern I see, and it's these 3 3-letter words. One of them is probably the. Based on letter frequencies, this one stands out. High frequency, then low, then high again. This is the exact blueprint you'd expect from the word the. So those are all the obvious word patterns on this easy puzzle. There were quite a lot, which is what makes the puzzle easy, at least relatively speaking. You could choose any of these patterns to start, so I'll go ahead and fill out everything since I saw that first. Just with that first pattern, the puzzle is pretty much solved. You can go fill out the other word patterns we pointed out earlier, but at this point you could also just read the puzzle based on context. I'm going to turn off the dictionary for now. Everything it, in, or is. Well, T and N are already used, so it must be is. Everything is so. The only 2-letter word that starts with S is so. This word looks like ordinary to me. Okay, so we have everything is so ordinary. It takes a lot of looking before you learn to see the extraordinary. And the sentence starts with in, and that looks like photography. And there we go. In photography, everything is so ordinary, it takes a lot of looking before you learn to see the extraordinary. Let's try a medium now. Once again, I'm going to put it in the app. You'll notice this one's a bit shorter, which is generally the case with harder puzzles since it means there's less patterns to go off of. However, I still see 2 patterns. This word is either through or because, and I'm thinking through since this letter is not very high frequency enough to be an E. The next pattern is this 3-letter word, which is high-low high frequency, meaning it's probably the. Let's fill them out. Notice that the TH in through aligns with the TH in the, making me very confident that I'm correct. Also, if we look at context, through the flows very naturally. Now after filling them out, some more word patterns arise. This word looks like treetops to me. After that, let's jump back into this first word, which is almost solved. If the word doesn't immediately pop into your head, think about context. Through the treetops, okay, so I'm thinking about nature-related words, and aha, the word must be sun. Once again, let's use context, grammar this time. Sun blinks through the treetops. What's a verb that looks like this? Spreads. The sun spreads through the treetops. Blink and blink. With a bit of thinking, you can probably figure out what this last word here is, but if you're stuck, let's try using letter positions. We see a P, blink, and a D. The letter between there must be a vowel, or that word wouldn't sound right. Lucky for us, we used every single vowel except I, so let's try that. Ah, now that's better. This word seems like epidemic. Now for the last word. This is purely context. Based on the sentence structure, it seems like they're comparing the sun spreading to an epidemic, meaning this word must be like. Sun spreads through their treetops like an epidemic. It's a simile. Alright, ready for the hard puzzle? If you can solve this, you're pretty much set to solving 95% of the cryptograms you come across. With the medium, we saw less and more obscure word patterns at the start, and you had to use letter positions and apply context thoughtfully. With hards, there's basically no word patterns at the start, and some of the words might even be deceptive, either not following common letter positions or being a fake word pattern. The word swiftly, for example, is 7 letters long but only has 1 vowel. Or a quote might use the letter O as a single letter instead of the usual A or I. With that in mind, let's begin. As you can see, no word patterns pop out, so where do we start? Let's look for interesting letter positions. This letter here must be an O or an E, as you can see from all the dictionary suggestions. E and O are both high frequency, so we can't really narrow it down further. That just leaves trial and error. Let's start with E. Okay, now what else sticks out? This last word has an interesting double letter. Is it a vowel or a consonant? If this was a vowel, then it must be O since E is already used and A, U, and I don't come in doubles. But then, this word looks weird because O doesn't come after E, so this letter cannot be a vowel and must be a consonant. Let's use N as a placeholder consonant for now, as it matches the dictionary suggestion. This letter before N in this 4-letter word is very high frequency, So once again, is it a vowel or a consonant? If it was a vowel, it would have to work at the end of all of these words, and the only vowel that comes commonly at the end of words is E. There are some exceptions, like into ends in a O and idea ends in a A, but those don't make sense in this 4-letter word. Okay, so that means this letter must also be a high-frequency consonant, assuming our initial guess of E was correct. But one more thing to notice. This consonant pair comes here in this order, but it also comes in this 5-letter word in the reverse order, after the E. Strange. We need 2 consonants, somewhat high frequency, that appear correctly forwards and backwards in these words. If we try a couple, we can pretty quickly see that one of these words gets messed up. The only way to avoid this is if the letter were a vowel, and the only vowel that made sense was E. So why don't we try putting it as E, and then replace our very first guess with O. Ah, that looks much better. For one thing, the letter frequencies are quite nice, and I also see this word pattern, which is either does or goes, meaning the word ends in S. From a letter position perspective, it is very common to see a vowel, a space, then an E at the end in 4-letter words, as you can see by all these dictionary suggestions. The vowels are also spaced nicely in these 2 5-letter words, so let's continue with confidence. The next thing I see are these 2 words with the last letter of one being the first of the other. If you look at the most common words available, the only phrase that makes sense is out the. I can also confirm that the H is in a good spot, as this word could be when. From here on, it's just context. The second word is a verb, so the sentence starts with a noun. The most common noun using the letters we have left is love. Love does out the or goes out the. Goes makes sense. And what do you go out of? A door. Love goes out the door when blank blanks, so this word ending in es is a verb. So after when, this word is a noun, and a very common noun which fits this word pattern is money. Then we fill in the rest, comes, and innuendo. Love goes out the door when money comes innuendo. This was a good example of when you have to learn to break the rules. The letter T was super low frequency in this puzzle, and innuendo is such a random word, it might have been tempting to just give up when we saw that giant word ending in O. Remember, these rules are just guidelines. No quote will check every box, but if a lot of the letters are checking a lot of the boxes, frequency-wise, position-wise, and context-wise, you're probably on the right track. Sometimes the process just takes a lot of trial and error.